Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host, as always, Objectively Dan. This is the live call-in show. Happens every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, where me and a special guest talk to people about what people believe and why. And this week's special guest is almost a doctor, Matthew Rahme. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I'm glad to be here, ready to talk about, science and truth.
Yeah. And so, Matthew Rahme, your YouTube channel is Almost a Doctor. You've appeared on Nervardia's channel as well. Nervardia was a previous guest on this show, and also I was on one of her videos a little recently as well. But you, in particular, have a lot of knowledge in specifically the field of spectroscopy, as well as things related to that. So I was hoping you could start off by telling us a bit about your educational background and what makes you so special.
Well, I mean, my mum always said I was special, but that I think is a different thing. So as you mentioned, my background is kind of in spectroscopy, but I'll get to that in a minute. My channel name, Almost a Doctor, reflects what I'm currently doing. I'm currently doing a PhD in physics. So I am very interested in the scientific process. How do we go from, we think this is going on, to actually figuring out what is going on?
Right.
Spectroscopy is a particular field where we can figure out what's going on around us using some part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Spectroscopy is, I think, translates from the old Greek to using light to investigate. So you can either bombard something with light or look at the light that comes out. And I don't just mean visible light, I mean lots of different ones. So I've got a bit of background with lasers, hence the background for anyone who's watching the show as well. This is a laser I put together. It's a helium neon one. So you have particular colors that come off, but you can also look at things like the sun, figure out what's the sun made of, how hot is the sun. You can look at atoms, you can look at molecules, see what are they doing. When we look at diagrams in science books, in papers, they'll have all the molecules drawn out. How do we know that's the case? And that's kind of where I get to with spectroscopy. More broadly, apart from that, my background is also in chemistry and physics. So that's how I got to my current area of spectroscopy. So I've looked at organic chemistry. I've looked at molecules in medicine, particularly metals. I've done a couple of courses in. Physics covers a lot of things. One of my favorites is astronomy. I'm technically part of an astrophysics group, though my work is actually in environmental monitoring or building detectors for that. So I've kind of got a broad background. I also have a bit of a background in business, but I tend to ignore that one for the most part.
Yeah.
But I've just been interested in science for most of my life.
We're not a super business oriented show, but that other stuff that can stay. We can talk about that. But yeah, obviously you have that physics background, which is something that's pretty valuable for those of us who, like to demonstrate, the quote unquote truth of things using science, because a lot of science, a lot of people say all science kind of boils down to physics at the end of the day. That's a claim people do make, because psychology is just, that's just a study of people, but people are made of atoms, and atoms are part of, you can boil it down to a lot of that stuff, which is funny, but also, super important. And particularly, spectroscopy in particular is important for how we can answer some of the questions that we didn't even think to ask for long periods of time. Like, what is the sun made of? We know that because of the science of spectroscopy, along with other things. But that in particular is how we know, and also helps us know how to figure out the dates of certain materials and stuff as well. And so, it's important when we talk about young Earth creationist stuff, we know these materials and where they come from and how all this kind of works. And naturally, when you go into a field like this that involves a lot of math and a lot of physics, there's going to be a lot of cranks and stuff out there as well that are going to try to completely derail everything the community has been doing for a long time. So part of the reason why we wanted to talk to you today was also to talk about what are some of the kookier ideas out there. A lot of that's what we hear right now is, of course, the 5G towers and stuff. That's what I think of, people who don't understand how radio waves work and stuff. I mean, even that goes back to like microwave myths and stuff, right? People think that when you're cooking food in your microwave, you're actually radiating your food, like it becomes radioactive, which is not what that means. That's not how that works. So, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that. Like, what's your intersection there when we talk about this field?
Well, I've particularly over the last couple of years that I've started teaching, I've also got interested in how to communicate science. And so that's brought me in contact with a lot of these. So and a lot of it is that there's just an enormous mountain of misinformation out there, but it's nothing new. And so I also have an interest in how do you tackle these problems? How do you tell people what's actually going on? Because one of the things with science, there's a few major misnomers, but one of the first ones that comes to mind is that science itself is boring. It's slow and it's tedious, but that's never how it's portrayed. The findings, on the other hand, are fascinating. Mm-hmm. What you can do with it is amazing. But to go through and be like, this is how we started at this information, I went through all the way and came back to this is where we are now, is not a quick process. Where we always get presented with breakthroughs, but that's not how it goes. So, for example, with the 5G towers, 5G in general, a lot of that, is a misunderstanding of what radiation is, how it works. And so sometimes it's just a matter of trying to present that. So, for example, the 5G, people talk about radiation. The word radiation has a very negative kind of connotation with it. Whereas to someone who's studied science or someone who's interested and has looked at it, radiation can mean a lot of things. So you can be talking about nuclear radiation, like what would happen if you fell into a nuclear reactor, for example. But you could be talking about light. So if I'm talking about the lights that I've got shining on me, that's radiation as well. And in fact, the radiation coming off the light here, each of those photons has more energy than the photons coming off a 5G tower. The light here has more potential to do me damage than a 5G tower, which those sorts of things. And with the microwave, all it does is heat things up.
Yeah.
It's not going to, so we always get scared about, what if the radiation comes out to me? Well, if it does, it's going to heat you up. And that's the first thing you'd feel. But we have ways of blocking that. That's why you have the little mesh with all the holes in it. So that the photons, because the wavelength is too big, can't fit through those holes. That's why you can actually see into a microwave without a problem. And so it comes back to how do you communicate this to people? And I've always had an interest in that.
Yeah, you've seen like they have these things you can buy, like these cages for people's routers to supposedly block out the radiation that comes with the Wi-Fi routers in people's houses. Like they actually have that, which is like, defeats the whole purpose of having a Wi-Fi router in the first place. Like it's supposed to send stuff out and receive stuff. So I don't know. People get really confused about the science of a lot of this stuff. And this sad thing is, of course, there have been more than one 5G towers like attacked now because people really think this in particular is doing harm. But just the science of this stuff in general is really lost on people. So I guess I'm wondering, like, what's your ideas on how to talk to more people about the nitty gritties on this kind of stuff? Because I mean, I can tell you, I'm a layperson and I can read what I see in a book or on the internet, and maybe I can do that effectively, but I haven't studied this stuff for years, so I don't know the ins and outs. So if I see somebody throwing a bunch of stuff at me, I can only refer to people like yourself. So what's the easiest way to, talk to people about these sort of highfalutin scientific concepts? What's your strategy there?
I think the best strategy is kind of multi-pronged, because people will listen to different people on different platforms. So I love shows like this. This is one way of doing it. Other ones, like my YouTube channel, I try and make shorter videos that kind of have interesting twists to them to give people a different way of thinking. Sometimes it's a matter of going on more, public, say, like TV broadcasting stations. So I guess it really depends on the issue, but the main thing that has to happen is just repetition. It is so easy to come up with pseudoscience, but it is very hard to communicate real science, because there is a big disconnect between that scientific process and then how it gets presented. Because I said, if you follow everything through in a proper scientific paper, it's fairly boring on the face of it until you actually get into it, until you realize what the implications of those are. And so, yeah, I think it's up to people who do have a science background to join with people who are just better at, good at communicating, platforms like this, news media I've already mentioned, and just saying what they do, being like, here's what it actually is. And that's why I like the back and forward, because then it allows people who, it's like, oh, I get a say in this as well. This is what I think. And then you can be like, okay, that's very interesting, but this is what we have to correct. Or actually, no, you got that correct. And like anyone can do science. It just takes a lot of time. And so hopefully today we can get some good information. But if there was one answer, if there was one way of fixing all the misinformation out there, I wish I knew it.
Yeah, I wish I knew it too. Now, I need your comments on something here. Our U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene said that the California wildfires were started by lasers. So I was just wondering, do you have any commentary on that?
I have a bit I can say on that. So
Okay.
I was looking at one of the comments she made, and it was I think she was thinking that we were reflecting sun's light down and occasionally missing these like solar batteries that were absorbing the energy, and it was starting the fires. That was kind of the interpretation I got. If you were reflecting the sun rays down, one, it wouldn't be a laser. Lasers are a very specific definition, and they have one color and generally also coherent for anyone who wants to look that up. It just means the wavelengths all line up very nicely. It's very useful in research. I won't get too much into that. The other thing people seem to not also know with lasers is that the beam, like most light, will spread out as it travels. So if you're trying to target something from space, by the time the laser reaches the Earth, it's going to be covering quite a wide area.
Yeah.
So you also see this when people, like with flat earthers who fire lasers over a long distance, like, I can still detect the laser, the Earth's not curved, and they forget that the laser will actually widen as it spreads.
Right? It disperses over time, and that's why, like, yeah, we do send out like radio signals and television signals out in the space, but they get so spread out, that the strength of these signals, isn't the same over time. Yeah, I think I heard about that. Yeah.
And lasers are also a very inefficient energy source. If you're going to make a weapon, if you're going to make something out of it that could do this, you wouldn't do a laser. It's just the worst way to go about it. Lasers have very specific uses. And yes, they are kind of used in the military, but as just a flat up weapon to start bushfires or to send energy from space to here, not a very good or efficient method.
Jewish space lasers, probably not the starter of the California wildfires. Is that your take?
As someone coming from the non-existent Australia where we get bushfires all the time, I have never seen a laser start a fire.
All right. I just want you on record, Matthew. I just want to know if this is the truth. And also, apparently, all the Austin Powers movies are complete lies at this point. Which
I made a video on why you can't put lasers on sharks for anyone who wants to go check that out. But yeah, as I said, lasers don't make very good weapons. They're just not how you do it. You can use them to maybe target a couple of incoming missiles, but or for aiming. But in terms of making space weapons, I can think of a million better ways to start a fire.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, if I had access to a giant space laser, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I would try to do. I don't know if I'd try to start a fire, but I would want to see, maybe what we could do with it, right? So let's go back a second to the spectroscopy stuff, because I think this stuff's pretty interesting. We were kind of talking a little bit before the show. My first exposure to spectroscopy was in college. I had an astronomy course where we had to do these calculations on the temperature of different stars, and then based on their distance and their temperature, kind of figure out how old they were and stuff. I think it was all very complicated, and I didn't do very well on that particular part. But it was an early key for me in understanding, like, oh, this is how we know this stuff. Because when you grow up and you hear someone say, oh yeah, the Earth is such and such years old, and the sun is such and such years old, and this planet such and such years old. How the heck do they figure that out? You're like, were you there? Like people just it seems like you can just make these numbers up if you don't actually understand the processes and stuff. And so, my growing up and learning about the world and the experiences of scientists who are smarter than me who have been figuring this out has been like, oh wow, it's been years and years of studying these subjects that we figured this stuff out. It's not just tradition. It's not just one scientist on high giving information to others. It's actually very diligent work, and a lot of times it's very boring work, writing papers and recording observations and stuff like that. And I think this stuff kind of gets lost again on the general population. I mean, you can go to college and still not know a lot of this stuff if you don't, take too many classes in the sciences. And so I don't even think a college education is always enough. I think you do need specific kinds of, classes in the sciences to figure this stuff out. So I don't know, like when I talk to young Earth creationists, for example, and we talk about how we know about the materials of the sun or the moon and stuff like that. Like a lot of times they don't even realize how we know this stuff because they don't know, hey, there's lots of people that have been trying to figure this out for a long time. Or maybe they just, I don't know, they just heard something one time and that's how they get their knowledge. But yeah, I mean, like, what do you think about that? Knowing that you've been studying this for a while, there's these processes, but like a lot of people just don't know what you do. Is that frustrating or?
I see it more as an opportunity for me to get out and tell them what I do. If I can try and get people to listen, because the findings, as I said, are very fascinating. And I love how you brought up the temperature of the sun, temperature of stars one, because a lot of things in astronomy have to be approximated because we're only observing from our one tiny little dot in the universe. And it also is where you get them kind of marriage of theoretical science with kind of practical observations. There's a lot of people who like say, oh, but it's only theoretical, or it's, you can't always trust, like theoretical physics, for example. But there's no real separation. You don't get that kind of separation in the different science fields. Like there's no distinct line between chemistry and physics. It's a very broad kind of overlap. And so you have to take all these different pieces of information that have been developed sometimes over the last 400 years to get to what we know now. So for the example with the temperature one, it's one of the few cases where we can be almost spot on about what we know about what's going on. So if you want to figure out the temperature, it's actually balancing different equations, and you can get a very, very nice mathematical prediction for what the temperature is. And then you can just look at the color of the sun. You can look at the colors that have been emitted out of certain elements. You can figure out not only the temperature it need to be to make that exact spectra, but you can also figure out the makeup, those different elements that are there. What are their concentrations? Because if you figure out a few things, you can then go through and learn the rest. And so, that's a very good example, because I remember in our class, they said, all right, here's the theory. Now we want you to go and do some calculations. We want you to run these, some computational experiments. And then later on, we had to do it for more real elements. Then we had to do this. Well, this is a solar spectra. So what does this say about it? So when you go through, science, particularly at a senior level, a lot of it is even from kind of first year, college level, university level and above. It's not just here's the theory. It's here's the theory. Now there's a lab. I want you to go check it.
Yeah.
And
you have to do it yourself. Yeah. You get to. That was my experience too. That was my experience when I took one of these classes. Like it was never just here's what this book says. It's look, we can do this in a lab. We can show you all the techniques. If I was taking that kind of course, but that course in particular, we did have lab work for that kind of stuff. So yeah, it is fascinating. It's fascinating, but it's also sad to me because I get to have conversations with folks like you on this show, and I can hear all day about all the amazing stuff that the community of smart people have figured out that I get to just talk about on this show. And it's like, well, and everybody around me just doesn't either has no interest or just doesn't realize like, hey, there's so many answers to these questions people have. We don't have to guess as much as people make it out like we do, you know. But I don't know. People are not trusting science as much these days. It seems like people are getting a little weary, and there's a lot of reasons why. We might go into that later because we were talking about that too, about the trust in some of our institutions. But we do have some calls, Matthew. So I think we should go ahead and get to that if you're ready.
Oh, I'm definitely ready.
All right, cool. Well, before we get to calls, I have to thank our special patron of the week. That's right, folks. Every single week we have a special patron that we'd like to thank. And if the crew has the one for this week, they can go ahead and let me know. We didn't actually do a check for it beforehand. But once we get that out there, I will shout out the name. Here we go. We got it in the group here. And the patron of the week is Maxwell. Thank you, Maxwell, for donating to the group. There it is, Maxwell Carlisle. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Sorry about that, folks. Thanks so much. You can donate on patreon.com/truthwanted. All of the money that goes to the Patreon helps get this show happening. For example, you may have noticed I am using my personal Sennheiser headphones because I accidentally broke the other ones, and so now we got to get new ones. So those of you who donate to the show are helping get new equipment like that because of clumsy folks like me. So thank you guys so much for making this show happen. But yeah, let's go ahead and get to some calls. Are you ready, Matthew?
Definitely.
All right, cool. This first one is interesting. I want to talk to, this is Al calling in from Wisconsin. Al, what's going on?
Yes. Well, I have a problem.
Okay.
I was going to talk about Scientology.
Okay.
Okay. However, I happen to have a degree in physics.
Okay.
And physics is the biggest thing in my life. So your guys babbling away has really piqued my interest. However, I suppose I should stick to the subject. Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead and call, because if you called in with the call screener, we want to know what you were talking with them about. So I understand you were a former Scientologist, or you had connections to Scientology?
I was in Scientology for, I don't know, maybe 10 years.
Holy shit, 10 years. Wow.
Yeah,
I think you were the first former Scientologist that's called into this show, I think. So welcome.
Well, thank you. I have no clue what I'm going to say. I'm kind of hoping you will ask some questions and lead me.
Well, yeah. Let me start from the beginning, I guess. How'd you get involved with Scientology?
Long story. I was a Buddhist for a while, and I bumped into this guy that had me borrow this book that kind of fascinated me, and I went to his center, and I took some classes, and that was it.
Man, okay. So you were in the org, so this was in Wisconsin, or was this somewhere else?
It was in Minnesota.
In Minnesota. Okay. So my I'm not an expert on Scientology, but I know how some of the beginning stuff works. And you tell me if this is accurate. Yeah. I understand that they get you to come in and they want you to kind of take these classes. I think first they kind of give out these like personality tests and stuff like that. They want to figure out what that's about. And then they want to give you more information about it. So they offer you to sign up for these classes. And the more classes you take, the more money you put into it. And then, they try to give you a membership. And eventually you start doing stuff for them. I mean, am I talking about the right thing here? Is that kind of what happened with you?
You're halfway there. The first half was correct. The second half was an error.
Okay.
Now, to my experience, okay. I've never heard of a membership. That's new to me.
Okay.
Maybe I can clarify a little bit of that. Most people don't know there's two parts to Scientology. There's one thing called Sea Org, and then there's another part called public. Mm-hmm. I was public.
Okay.
And many people get into this. You have a question?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm just trying to clarify for our audience. So Sea Org, if I recall, is where you get to sign the billion-year contract, and like pledge your soul to the church, right? To like do stuff for L. Ron Hubbard. And then the public stuff is just working with the public in general as a Scientologist, correct?
You're 90% correct.
Okay.
I wanted to bring up the Sea Org. It's not a C, but it's SEA, as in ship. Hubbard was nuts about getting on these 3 ships and traveling around the world, and he ended up calling it Sea Org. But you're correct in that you sign up for this. I don't know what you call it. You sign up for millions of years, a contract that you're going to devote your life to this and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to be very frank here. That's kind of my personality type. Those people that do that, I think, are, shall I say, not very bright.
Okay. But you were in this organization. There's a lot of people that don't understand how somebody could even get involved with Scientology in the first place. You know, like for an outside observer, if you're just watching, you know, like South Park or something and you see it, you think like, oh, this is crazy. But obviously, I mean, there's people joining this like every day. So like, what was the appeal? And like, how did you, like, what were you doing while you were there?
Well, that you've already answered my question, essentially. My first question that should have come up was, what do you believe Scientologists do? And your answer is you don't know.
Well, I know they do. I mean, I've seen Going Clear and stuff. You know, like I've seen a couple of stuff out there. I know there's different functions of different members of the church, but I don't know. I couldn't tell you all the different roles. So yeah, I don't know. Okay,
from my experience, the primary issue is going into these sessions in which the one person helps you remember past lives.
Right.
You know that?
Yeah, I do know about that. The engrams and stuff.
Well, most of the classes you take when you get into Scientology, they have real-world applications. Like the first class you take is on communication, how to talk to people. Another class you would take, the second class probably, would be, they call it super literate. And what that is learning how to use a dictionary. You get a book and you go look up every word in that book and then reread it, and you find out that understanding what words mean are very powerful. I can't think of the third or fourth class, but those are the 2 big ones that you get into. So basically, when you sign up for a class, and it costs like $50, I don't know what it is, it's a class on how to talk to people. The second one is how to use a dictionary. They're public, popular, or whatever. Then you find out about these other classes, and the other classes you take or the other sessions you take prepare for this experience to go past life. Then the majority of your work is going past life. That's kind of the middle range. Then you get to the upper OT level, they call it, operating Satan, where that's restricted knowledge. You're not supposed to explain what that is.
Right.
Next question.
Well, so, okay, you were part of this org, like you were just taking classes for the most part? Were you doing anything else for them?
From my perspective, before I got in it, I said, I am not going to become part of a cult. I looked at it like they have a product. I'm going to pay my money for the product, get it, and forget it. That was my attitude.
Yeah, and then, but you were with them for 10 years, right? So, I mean, what did that look like?
Well, I did a bunch of classes in Minneapolis. I went out to California a couple times to get some of this upper level stuff, and then I moved out there for about a year and a half or 2 to get all the upper level stuff.
So if you're comfortable saying, do you know how much you spent in total for all the times you've been there?
Probably $200,000.
Okay. Wow. Do you think that's pretty typical?
The reason I left is because somebody got control of the organization and started increasing their prices dramatically, which was just not tolerable. So I left.
Wait, so you didn't wait? The only reason you left was because it got too expensive? It wasn't even because you disagreed with the beliefs?
Yeah, it was just too expensive.
So wait, do you still consider like Scientology valid in some way?
Some of the primary principles, yes.
Like what?
Past lives.
past lives, like we've been reincarnated from previous lives?
Yes.
Okay.
Through this organization, I have reviewed 500, if not 1,000 or more past lives that I have experienced.
How do you do that?
Well, now that's a good question. It's a very difficult question to answer unless you want to kill about 2 or 3 hours explaining what it is.
I definitely don't have enough time for that on this show, unfortunately. But like,
I understand.
Is it like, is it from doing the kind of hooking you up to one of those machines and doing it that way, or how are you viewing past lives in this?
I'll try and do this brief.
Okay.
The process includes closing your eyes, and the person asks you some questions, and you answer them. That's it. Now, you want to know how to go to past lives? Everybody can do it. I went through the class to learn how to do it. I have sat with people that have no clue about Scientology, and I have gotten them to go past lives. It's an extremely simple process.
How do you falsify a belief like that? What if I tell you about a past life, but I'm actually making up a story about myself? How do you tell the difference?
I have been presented with that question or concept several times, and I simply say, I know you don't, I don't care.
I know you don't, I don't care?
I've got a couple of questions too, if I might. On
yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
So the first thing that's coming to mind is the human brain, the human mind can be very, very creative. When you think of the dreams that we have, when you think of just how suggestive our thoughts can be, whether that's subconscious or conscious, immediately what comes to my mind, I try and think of, okay, what are some alternative explanations that we do know are quite possible? And then how would we distinguish that? And so I'm thinking at the moment, this sounds like people's imagination, because again, that falsifiability bit, we need a way to show this. If you want people to believe it, if you want to tell people this is what's going on, we know it, we need some way to test it. It's the same with most science. So I'm thinking, how would we distinguish this from human creativity, human imagination? I'm not claiming it is, I'm just saying it's a viable alternative.
I have 2 answers to that question. Let me finish with both. Number 1, I am not trying to convince you it's true.
Well, this is Truth Wanted. That's kind of the whole point of the show. I'm not going to lie. That is like kind of what we do.
Okay, then I'll continue with number 2.
Okay.
Phrase your question more accurately so I can focus on it.
Okay, how do you distinguish between these being memories of past lives and just being the human brain being creative and having an imagination? How do you know that these are real experiences that the person is remembering?
Okay, the process that's used, you are taught the process before you begin the process. And it's very critical in the process that the operator says nothing that would suggest anything. The words are, remember that, remember this. The client comes up with their own things. You will ask him, okay, tell me something that hurt you. And the guy comes up with that by himself. Then the command might be, okay, locate a time something happened. There's no suggestion of the operator. So everything that happens comes from the client's mind, okay?
Can I clarify something? Sorry to interrupt. Shoot. I just want. Oh, yeah. So you mentioned that we're doing a lot to, the people who are instigating this are doing a lot to mitigate suggestions. But one of the problems with psychology, and I will make this clear, I'm not an expert in psychology. As we established, I'm on the physics side of things, is that one of the big problems is just how easy it is to put ideas in people's minds. There's a problem where in psychology, the color of the room can give you different results for a test that had nothing to do with it. So even telling someone, think of something that's happened in a past, or just giving them the idea that you're looking for a past life might be enough. And so just because you've asked these questions, you've been careful with that, my alarm bells are still going up, because there's still no way to distinguish between the person is still being creative and the past life. So if someone does come up with this, say here they have this story about a past life, I'm happy with the idea that maybe it's not just their imagination.
Yeah, like
that could be possible. Sorry, Dan.
Well, it's like, look, I had a locker in middle school with a combination. That's something that happened to me in this life. If I can remember a previous life, surely I can remember my locker combination from middle school. And I could give you a number and we can test that number, right? Like we can see if that combination still works if we went back to that specific locker. So I'm wondering, tagging on to Matthew, what he's saying, what can we do with this past life stuff where we can demonstrate something the same way? Is there any way to do that?
I do not think so. Now, I have heard people that have gone into operations under, they're knocked out. And later on, I have heard that people say they went through this session and they could recreate the entire memory of that event while they were unconscious. Now, I don't know if that's true or false.
They recreate it while they're unconscious?
I know the human brain can actually remember things while it's unconscious. I think particularly audio, so being able to hear things is very, very common when you're still in a coma. So the idea that they could, that their body, their brain could still reconstruct something that had gone on is not too far-fetched for, say, an operation. I have an idea of potentially how to do this. Has this kind of past life method ever allowed this person to discover something they couldn't have possibly known themselves? So they had a past life, you go back through records, find that person, and could show something about that person that the initial subject didn't know.
Yes.
Have you got an example? I'm just curious to explore it a bit further.
The information is spread all over YouTube.
Okay.
If you're willing,
it doesn't really help us on this live call-in show right now, Al. But tell you what, we have other callers that we need to get to for right now. But this call is really, really, really interesting. Would you be willing to come back on the show next week at around the same time so we could talk about this more?
I would be willing to do that. However, I'd more like to talk about physics.
Okay. Well, like I said, next week, we got some other callers that we got to get to right now. But I don't know why you want to talk about physics when you were literally in Scientology, man. I mean, that seems like kind of a bigger deal to me. I don't know.
Well, you don't know what I do in physics.
Physics is cool.
I guess I don't.
I'm really into quantum physics, but I'll talk to you next week.
Okay, Al, let's do it on a different time. We can talk about quantum stuff if we really want to, but I don't know. Like, damn, that was our first call ever on Truth Wanted from somebody who has been involved with the Church of Scientology. And I'm very curious. That was pretty interesting. Now, I know the past life stuff is a thing that they talk about, and we chose to talk about it for this particular episode, but there's so much more. Like, it's Scientology. Like, L. Ron Hubbard is probably one of the greatest grifters of all time. Like, it's undeniable that this man was just lying through his teeth through like so much of his career. I don't understand how anybody with anybody who can Google in this day and age can get into. I mean, I understand why. I understand why people get into Scientology, right? Because they're not like there's a lot of pressure that goes into it, a lot of sales pressure that goes into those actual classes and stuff. I mean, like, I get it. I get the function of that, but at the same time, there's so many resources now to look into this stuff, and it's scary to think that people are still getting into it, and to be into that for 10 years. You put $200 grand into classes, and to say that was worth it, I don't know.
That's
bizarre.
It is sometimes, it is surprising, but still, well, sometimes surprising, sometimes not, but still shocking at least about how easy it is to influence people, how easy our brains are tricked. And that was one of the things that was hard, but you had to force yourself, at least in, through my studies, to come to is figuring out what is good evidence. What is sufficient evidence to say my conclusion is likely correct? I don't believe in absolute truths. I don't believe you can be absolutely sure about anything, but how do you get to that? So when somebody says, oh, you can just tell, or there's not really a way of demonstrating this, that's immediate alarm bells for me. But there was a time in my life, particularly when I was younger, where that whole idea of these past lives or psychics was very intriguing. It's this kind of the idea of you could have superpowers. We all kind of want that. We want this ability to do things like that. And we just can't underestimate our brains' desires to want those things to be true. Like I wish I had the ability to read minds. Wish I could remember past lives if that was a thing. But sometimes the truth is sad. As much as we want to find that truth, we have to be willing to say it may not be what we want. And I think that's part of it. Not the only one. You've already pointed out some nice ideas, but
look, if there's anybody else that's involved with Scientology, you got to call into this show. That's all I'm saying. If there's more of you guys out there, let's have it. I can't even believe we just had that conversation right there. But we need to move on. We got some other people that are on the line. So let's go ahead and let's talk to Scott calling in from California. Scott, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Going pretty good.
Since I called last, long time. Thanks, few years.
Oh, sweet. But, well, welcome back. How can we help?
Yes, sir. So just to let you know, I'm very agnostic when it comes to like ontological claims or metaphysical claims, even from science, right? But I try to understand stuff. And, and I read a lot of stuff, and recently was watching like this really weird YouTube video from Viper TV Science about event ontology. And so I saw that Matthew was on the show, so I was like, yeah, maybe somebody could finally kind of explain this to me, because it seems really kind of strange, and I'll kind of tell you how I understand it, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew. But so there's like this, there's thing ontologies, and then there's event ontology. Thing ontologies are like ontologies that consider the universe to be made up of like a plurality of discrete objects. So it's kind of been traditionally accepted as a basic truth of existence. The universe is made up of things, obviously. But then a change to the traditional thing ontology kind of happened, and it took shape as kind of a description of reality, wherein the fundamental understanding of matter in the universe is not really in three-dimensional space, but in four-dimensional space-time. So in this case, from what I understand, the configuration of matter and energy does not change in time, but it's wholly present in space-time. In other words, everything that there is in space-time simply exists all at once. So existence is not tied to a mode of time, such as only the present, or the present and the past existing and the future not existing, maybe the future becoming as time passes. But the shift from space to space-time kind of rules out in the first place ontologies that sort of tie existence to a specific, mode of time, like presentism. So it kind of has a lot of implications for our understanding of ontological or metaphysical reality, right? So I was just kind of wondering, what were your thoughts on that? Because I don't really understand it 100%. I think I understand what they're saying about this, but it's really intriguing, though.
Unfortunately, this is getting a bit beyond the kind of areas of science that I've looked into. I wish I did know more about it. For me, I do tend to be, I guess, a bit more of like a pragmatist when it comes to these things. A lot of these theories sometimes have a nice mathematical basis for them, or there is some reason why they've been brought up, or sorry, theories, hypotheses. till we can to show them. But I'm more worried about how does it manifest to us? How do we experience? Because for me, my goals in science is to try and figure out how this reality works so that we can benefit mankind, we can make our living more comfortable, we can improve technology. And whilst I find the philosophical sides of it, it's like this very interesting, it kind of gets a bit beyond what I've done, unfortunately. I wish I had more for you. But for me, it's more of how do we experience? So if we still experience time, it might be a bit of an illusion, as you're saying. There are things that might not line up with our traditional thoughts of it. But how do we use that? What does this mean? And so I'm more thinking about then how would we test this? How would we know if this is the case? I don't know if you have anything on that.
Right.
Sorry, I wish I had more.
I'm surprised at how much I was able to follow you, Scott, because I think I understand this concept. This is stuff I've at least read about this before. I think this goes back to, even Einstein was talking about this idea of time being a part of everything around us. It's not just separate. It's part of existence. It's why when we talk about the Big Bang theory, for example, when we talk about, it may not make sense to say that there was a thing before the Big Bang because time itself is a part of our existence. So it doesn't make sense to say something before time, right? Like I think this is part of that. And I have no idea. I am not qualified at all. I could make any assessments one way or another, but
yeah, I did. I was looking at when I was watching the video and kind of dug into the literature a little bit, looked at some of the books and books on relativity and where all this stuff kind of stems from. And one of the practical solutions that came out of event ontology was GPS. The fact that we can understand how GPS works and stuff like that based on, distance and, from gravity and how all that stuff kind of affects time. Time is kind of malleable.
Yeah, it literally, this is what Interstellar was about, the movie Interstellar. If you guys ever watched that, like when the astronauts they were on the planet and time was literally moving. Well, it was slower than everywhere else. Yeah, slower than everywhere else. And this was based on at least what I understand to be quote unquote real principles of science. I don't know. I can't check out the math, but there is like some sort of validity to that, right? And you're right with GPS, because when things are orbiting over the Earth, they are actually moving it at a very, very, very small amount of time, like slower than everywhere else on Earth. And it's a weird thing to think about, but we've done a test with atomic clocks and stuff, and we can demonstrate that there is actually a change in time just simply based on what seems to be location in space, which is kind of crazy to think about. Yep. So it's also why they talk about when you go at the speed of light, that how you age would be different than everywhere else around you. Fascinating stuff. I'm not nearly qualified to talk about it. So sorry that it seems like Matthew gave it his old college try too, but I don't know. I think it's a big whiff from us tonight, Scott. I don't know if we could help you out any more than that.
Well, I thought I'd ask. I'm not much of a big physics guy. I like to read it. I'm really fascinated, especially about the deep stuff like this. I get really fascinated to see how these sort of predictions based on these weird theories, how did they turn out? And GPS was one of them, and everything you're talking about.
And the reason why, I don't know if I clarified earlier, the reason why GPS is specific, and part of that is because if we have a measurable difference in time between what we experience on Earth and one might experience, orbiting the Earth above, then you have to calculate for that difference. So that's another reason why we know, for example, that time is experienced differently, because they have to put that into their calculations when they do GPS coordinates and stuff, at least for the more sophisticated ones. So there you go. That's what I know. Again, this is all pop science, surface level stuff, and I couldn't tell you any more than that.
I just to give you an idea of how difficult it is to do calculations for general relativity. And
Yeah.
relativity is one of my favorite topics. But if you wanted to do calculations, you, at least at the university I went to, you would need to spend 4 years studying physics, at least 4 years, before you got to calculations for general relativity. And even then, you're not going to do these full calculations like that. The maths and the theory behind it is super, super hard. But it's really, really cool what you get out of it. And so, yeah, the GPS is one really good example. The atomic clocks, you move them, you fly one around the Earth, keep the other one still. You can do the calculations, figure out that one of them has gone through less time than the other one. And because of relativity, one of my favorite kind of little examples of what you could theoretically do with it, though we haven't quite figured out how to practically do it yet, is a warp drive. So a lot of things so if you heard of like Star Trek warp drive, it's potentially possible where instead of traveling from A to B like we do, you bend space around your object. And one of the really cool things I like about that is if you flew using this thing out very, very far from the Earth, you went 66 million light years away with a giant telescope, and you turned around and looked back, you could see the dinosaurs go extinct. So there's all these weird things about how you can mess with time. And so, yes, I wish I had more on the theory, but
unfortunately,
relativity is just...
We don't have enough time to go into it right now. I think that's all the time we got for this particular call. But Scott, it's good to hear you again. I remember the last time you called in, you also talked about a grand philosophical inquiries. So, keep at it. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching the show.
No problem, man.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. Sorry, I cut him off right there. I didn't mean to. I was trying to get it done beforehand, but we're doing not our typical. I say it's not our typical call screen setup. We've been doing this quarantine setup now for like almost a year now. It's kind of crazy to think about, but anybody who is wondering about that, we don't know yet either. We don't know when we'll go back to the studio space. We'll see. Actually, I may not be in the same space for too much longer either, and we'll talk about that maybe in the future as that comes up. But for now, Scott, do appreciate you calling in about that. But we got some other callers that I want to get to tonight. And next, we want to talk to Mike. He's been waiting on the line for a bit. Mike, calling in from Washington. What's going on?
So I'll jump into it. Kind of over the last couple of weeks, listening to, like the ACA suite of shows, there's been like callers for different shows that I thought have had semi-ridiculous claims. And it got me kind of thinking, especially in kind of like today's political climate, like how do we hold people accountable for kind of like really bad ideas? And I think if there was a solution, there'd be a lot less problems in the world, but it just doesn't seem that there's a good mechanism right now, especially with like social media and stuff, to kind of like rebuke people. And I do think, the truth matters. I think, someone could say, oh, this is just kind of a harebrained idea that someone, thinks, but, kind of on the aggregate, I think the problem is larger than the sum of its parts. And, just kind of, for example, I think 2 weeks ago on this show, someone was calling in about this giant crater or something that happened. And then, all these like biblical events fell from it. I did some research. On it. The group that studies this, crater it has like all dead links on their Wikipedia page. Like it was kind of this like sketchy, like Russian, like research group. Okay. That was weird. I looked up like underwater pyramids, Portugal, and it's like, looks like, come on, man. It looks like a hill. So like, he's saying this stuff, and then, he kind of had this reaction like, I don't know if I'm not trying to, prove anything, or, I hear like, that's kind of my truth. So I don't know what's the mechanism. I don't know if just like having conversations with people work, because then they're just like, okay, peace out. I said what I wanted to say. And then they just kind of go off and kind of continue to spew. So is there justice? in that sense, can you kind of bring people to I don't know, recount?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can't. It's very rare to change somebody's mind in a single conversation. In fact, when it comes to deeply held beliefs like the ones we talked about on here, I'd say it almost never happens. You can be a professional at this, and it still doesn't happen. I think people are too stubborn for this. I mean, you can look at my conversation with Anthony Magnabosco, for example. I think it's often cited on this show because, I mean, it's me, but also, like, I was still a Christian for like a year after I had that conversation with him, like, people's minds are unfortunately not going to change as easily. So in my opinion, what at least I try to do as a person who talks to people on the phone every week is I try to have that conversation out loud with somebody and try to point out things when I can, try to ask good questions when I can, so that the listener themselves can see if they would ask similar kinds of questions or what kind of answers that they would give to these questions. And so that they themselves can become skeptical, because chances are the person that I'm talking to on the other line, they're not going to change their mind, all things considered. We could probably talk to them for 30 minutes and they still wouldn't if they're going to be that deeply held, because people unfortunately just don't seem to work that way. Again, the more deeply held that belief is, the harder it is going to be to change. So, as far as justice, I try to counter as much as I can on here. I definitely try to give my piece on everything that I can. Unfortunately, all the hosts that do these shows, we're people too. We're not perfect. We're certainly not professionals. We just talk in front of a microphone. But I mean, we certainly try. I mean, can I improve? Absolutely. There's definitely times I've looked back when I'm like, man, I could have done this call better. I wish I could have said this and that. And that's a learning experience for me. But at the same time, I take solace in the fact that, hey, at least I'm doing something. At least I'm having a conversation with people about this stuff, because sometimes these people, they don't even want to talk to other people about what they think because they're afraid of being made fun of, or they're afraid that they're just going to look silly, and their minds will never change because they never talk to people about it. So at least we're getting a conversation out there, but there is limitations to it. There are weaknesses to it. And, I wish I could make everybody believe all the right things, but I might not always believe in the right things either, because I'm also human.
Yeah, I know
so,
you're right.
Yeah, it's tough though. I definitely feel you. And again, I wish I could do better myself sometimes, but I'm better than some people. If I'm not going to let a Nazi call in and just spew something or whatever, it's never going to be like that. So, yeah.
I think what had started this off kind of was, just how contentious this past political season was. Mm-hmm. And, I'll read an article on the BBC, and then they'll be like, oh, hey, this is what someone's hot take from this part of the country is. I read one that was after the election, this lady was like, I'm going to move out of the urban areas because they're going to go, to hell because, Biden's going to do all this stuff that's going to make it just completely unlivable. And it's it's cool that they report it, but it's she's it's probably not going to come true. So can we can the BBC track her down in 3 years and be like, okay, you said this, you're clearly wrong, whatever.
Yeah. And that's the problem with journalism in particular. This isn't we're not a news media outlet, but oftentimes, what news is supposed to do is report, and they're supposed to, verify what's true, what's not true, but they're also taking statements of what other people believe and accurately reporting those statements of belief, even if those statements of belief aren't necessarily true. So how do you counter that? Sometimes your job as a journalist isn't to, there's been a debate about this recently, actually, in a lot of circles. You'll see people talk about what is the role of a journalist? Is it to counter every single narrative that they find to be false and try to correct people on the spot when they interview them? Or is it to get an accurate account of what somebody believes and ask challenging questions, what an audience might ask, and just record answers there? Because it's tough, because once an outlet becomes a purveyor of truth, an arbiter of deciding, what's true or what's not, this is the debate of our times right now, right? I mean, look at the election fraud stuff.
I know. Yeah.
Like, I don't know that anybody has a good answer for you, Mike. I think he dropped out on the call there. No, maybe you're still there. I don't know. But point is, I wish I could tell you. I look at this stuff too, man, and I don't know. I try to do my little bit right here on this show, and damn it, I'm not perfect, but at least I'm trying. At least I can sleep at night knowing that I'm doing something, man. Because it's hard. I wish I could be doing more. Maybe I could be doing more, but I definitely have more sympathy for those who try to make content and try to talk to people live and do this stuff, because it's difficult. And there's always more we can do. But hey, it is what it is. I'm trying my best here. So hopefully you guys like what I'm doing. And if not, then we'll see. Matthew, what do you think about this? I think Mike accidentally dropped out of the call here.
Okay, so my first thoughts on this are to do with the grounding that I guess everyone needs in terms of figuring out what's true. So I guess you can think of that mental framework as like a scaffold. If the base scaffold that you're basing your beliefs and your understanding of reality is broken, has errors in it, then you can stick ideas or wrong ideas, false beliefs to it really easily. And that's, you can try talking to people, you can try educating people on how to think. And I think if you get people to think, if you get people to be skeptical, then that is sometimes the most powerful thing you can do, because when they come up against false claims in the future, they'll be more skeptical. Now, I'm not perfect. I can be wrong. And I was worried for quite a while that I was going to say terrible things on this show. I was just going to make statements that were easily shown to be incorrect. And I thought a bit more. It's like, but that's the whole point. I can be wrong. Everyone can be wrong. And so I think that's the first thing that we need to acknowledge, is that we're not always going to be correct. We're going to get things wrong, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make you less of a person. What's important is how you go about figuring out the ideas that you still hold that are wrong. And when you're presented with new ideas, how do you tell that they're wrong? And that's one of the reasons I do like the peer review process, if we want to link back to science, is that if you want to make statements in science, it needs to pass a panel of experts who know that area, who are familiar with that topic. I've managed to get a paper published, like first author paper. I've had a couple of others where I've been co-authors, and it's a bit of a nightmare process. It's got its own little kind of view from most scientists, but it is very, very useful. It's kind of one of the best tools we've got, is that you need to convince experts. I think maybe that's one way we could try and make this whole, make people more accountable, is that we don't necessarily punish people for being wrong, but when they present ideas, we try and get people to analyze them based on what other experts think as well. So we don't just say, oh, this one person said this, but here are the experts, this is what they're saying, here's the evidence. And I guess it all comes back down to that framework, that scaffold that we want to build underneath. And I'm still working on that scaffold myself. I'm still trying to make it better. I'm going to be wrong, but I think that's the first step.
Yeah, like for me, it's just I try to qualify everything I say. Like I try not to say anything that I couldn't point to a source to, at least, and that's a personal standard I hold to myself. I can't obviously do that for every single person that calls into this show. A lot of people do call in with their sources, and that's great, but I can't fact check that in the moment. There's limitations to doing this. And this show in particular, guys, I mean, it is what it is. It is a show produced for YouTube and for iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. And it is, at the end of the day, supposed to be an enjoyable listen for people. So I'm not only having conversations with people on here and trying to model what I would hope other people would do, but I'm also trying to make this listenable content for people, or watchable content for people. And I have to have that balance too. So like, even doing this show isn't always going to be the perfect model for how a conversation would look. In fact, I would say that in my real life conversations, they might be different sometimes in the ways that I do it on here, because I'm not hosting a show when I'm talking to somebody in real life. I might be willing to go down different avenues or rabbit trails that might not be palatable for listeners. So it's tough. making content and talking to other people at the same time, it's not easy. But I hope everybody at least takes something from this, which is like keeping the people in your own life accountable for their stuff, please. We may not be able to always keep the people in power accountable on an individual level, but you know what? I can have a conversation with my parents. I can have a conversation with my friends or my coworkers because I'm right there. And everybody else, you guys have friends, family, people you work with, you can have conversations with too if you're brave enough, if you want to do it. And in this day and age, it's started to become more necessary with more topics. And it doesn't seem like that's going to be changing anytime soon.
No,
But,
and I think sorry.
Yeah, we're good. We gotta keep going here and get to our next couple callers, so we can make sure we talk to everybody tonight. Next, we're gonna talk to Journey, calling in from North Carolina. Journey, what's going on?
Hey man, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, absolutely. How can we help?
Well, in listening from the beginning, there was a really interesting topic that the guy from the Scientology was talking about in terms of past life experience.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's okay to mention this, but because this wasn't what the call screener asked me about, but I've had a past life regression meditation, and I actually came up with some pretty interesting information from it.
Well, it's not really what the call. We want to stick. I think
Okay.
that's cool, but whenever you call in, we want to make sure you're talking to whatever you talk to the call screener about. So let's stick with that for right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that particular topic is that I did want to promote Dane Wigington's research, geoengineeringwatch.org, and his YouTube page. He's been covering the...
Yeah, what is that? What is he doing? Why are you promoting it? Why are you coming onto my show promoting somebody else's things? Huh? What's going on here?
Because it is important worldwide for everybody's health and the consciousness to be aware that it's a big problem in many different areas, and in hope
Chemtrails
would eventually be justice. That's the common term, but it's not the official term. But yeah.
You mean like
Aluminum,
jet contrails?
barium, strontium. No, that's very different.
Okay.
So I've got a question. You were starting to someone was starting to mention certain chemicals. Can I want to try something a little different. What are the sorts of chemicals that you think they're spraying? I'm going to bring this into the spectroscopy we were talking earlier.
There we go.
There's evidence, and I would even say proof of that. I have not personally done the tests to the rainwater or to the particulates coming out of the back of the plane, but there are many, many different people who have, including Dane Wigington. But it's really...
Sorry, I just wanted to ask what chemicals?
Let me give you a source. Hang on a second. Okay, so
right, trust me, we'll get to how we know the chemicals in a bit, but I just want to figure out what we're looking at first.
And strontium.
Okay.
Aluminum, barium, and strontium.
Okay, so a few things come to mind. These tests, do you know what tests they did to detect them? And also how because you always need to control what the control was. So let's start with how did they detect these chemicals? Do you know what the technique is? I'm happy to explain it.
And again, I would
listeners.
The reference is Dane Wigington, and he has hired a plane to fly behind a jet plane that was fitted with the upper atmospheric injection nozzles, and they did the control outside of the jet stream that they were following, and that was their control. And then they got into the jet stream after the plane in front of them turned on the nozzles to release what most people would term chemtrails, or what Dane Wigington would term upper aerosol atmospheric injection particulates. And in that test, they found aluminum, barium, strontium. Honestly, the list goes on, but the aluminum and the barium and the strontium are very toxic things that people need to be aware of. And
I really want to ask a couple of questions here. One, aluminium is one of the most common metals found on Earth. The reason it's so expensive is it's actually really hard to get as a pure metal. That's why it took us so long before we made things out of it. So the fact that you've detected aluminium somewhere is not a surprise. This is why I was asking how.
I personally haven't, except for in my research online. But Dane Wigington has, and many other websites have documented the same thing. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, my alarm bells are ringing very loud on the inside. I've got, kind of my internal monologue is screaming that I really want to know more, because this is the sort of stuff that I've done. This is what I teach, is how to detect things like this. So I want to know what techniques are they using, things like AAS, atomic absorption spectroscopy, or the more advanced versions of that we have now. They're using mass spectroscopy, which would also tell you about other molecules. And so he was flying behind a jet, but most flight regulations do limit how close you can get to other planes. And the other thing with clouds,
he had to pay a lot of money for a private jet to fly behind these other planes to be able to test.
Again, that I'm more worried about how close were they? What techniques? How are they intaking these chemicals? How are they testing them on the fly? My PhD is in how do we detect methane in the environment, a very basic chemical, but it's hard to do on any kind of specific level. Detecting gases in the air quickly and like second by second is not an easy thing to do. There's a reason why there's a lot of research.
I'm not the expert, but you can absolutely see them in the sky, and that's enough to at least know that they're doing what the scientists would call
so I don't like
radiation management.
No, I don't like to just say, no, you cannot see these. Like because I look at what the sort of detection techniques.
I'm sorry. Are you talking about methane? Because I wasn't talking about.
No, not methane. Sorry. I was back to what you were talking about. Sorry, I should have been a bit clearer on that. But when you said you can see these things, do you mean that visually, or you can detect them somehow?
Yeah, visually, it blocks out the sun.
No, I'm gonna stop you there. That if there was enough of these metals in the atmosphere to see them visually,
I'm not talking about the particulates. I'm talking about the upper atmospheric injection. What you might
I'm talking about that too.
Chemtrails, but but to use the layman's term, chemtrails, and you can see them, and they eventually block out. They do it at the beginning of fronts typically, and there's many reasons that they do it, but for the layperson, at the very least, when you're enjoying a blue sky day and then all of a sudden these particulates are covering up the sky, blocking out the sun, that is the obvious thing that everybody can.
So I find that very interesting. I just want to focus on that statement. You said they normally do them ahead of fronts. So my question now is, how do you know that's not just the weather coming in? Because I've watched these contrails being formed by jets on perfect blue skies, even in the middle of summer here. Although our summer's been a bit miserable this day, but we've still had a few really nice days. And I've watched them come over, and then they just dissipate, and they disappear. The sky doesn't get covered. Contrail. But you're saying they often do them ahead of fronts, but fronts is going to bring in new weather. Now, the fact that you're going to find some particulates in the atmosphere is not surprising. You're going to have that everywhere. That's, because you actually can't get rain unless you have some tiny particulate or speck of dust or something for the raindrop to form around. That's where the whole idea of cloud seeding comes from. But that is very, very far from the idea of, chemtrails. And these jets, no one has ever shown me a photo of these jets they use for this. I've seen photos where people have said that, but they're just planes that have ballast tanks full of water that they use to simulate people moving around. So when someone comes to me and says, you can just see these chemicals out there, my work is in detecting these chemicals. I've worked with some metals. So one of the labs I've worked in the past, we had to be very careful because we worked with heavy metals like lead and cadmium.
Yourself.
But aluminium was not one of the massive worries, but we had to know how to detect it. What are these looking for? And these chemicals, depending on the compounds you put them with, will change their color. So there's a lot here. I don't mean to confuse people. I'm just trying to get the idea out that this is not very simple about just, you can look up and see it. There's so much more to it. So my question comes back to,
but you can also,
how do we tell this apart from just regular weather patterns? Well, what's the specific technique? I'm not worried about the jets flying behind other jets because I've got my doubts about that story, but I'll be happy to look into it. But are we using a particular type of spectroscopy?
When you even go to the people doing it, they will acknowledge many universities take part in weather modification.
That's different things.
Universities admit in weather modification.
Weather modification and the idea of cloud seeding, such as iodine compounds that people have tried to spray in to say get it raining, because as I mentioned, raindrops need little particles to form around, is very, very different from somebody spraying toxic metals. Now, when you're at a university, pretty much any of the established universities around the world, to do any testing that would involve running tests that would have any interaction with the general population, you generally need to run through ethics. And I've known a lot of people who've done it. Fortunately, my tests tend to be more private labs where it's myself and the other scientists that are the only ones that would come into it, so it's a bit easier. But I do know a lot of people that have run these ethics testing, and to get anywhere near spraying aluminium, barium, strontium, heavy metals into the atmosphere, there is no way you'd be allowed to. So when you say that these universities say that, I think, unfortunately, there's been a bit of miscommunication in that they... Sorry?
And we're talking about the military. This is how they get around the ethics. It's the military-industrial complex that is.
Wait. Sorry, just backtrack. You just said it was the universities.
Conspiracy.
Now, yes, universities can have contracts from the military where military like, we want you to look at this topic. Here's the money. But the universities are still subject to their own rules. This is one of the advantages of being able to talk to someone who's doing a PhD, is that I see this. I'm with this process, I'm familiar with it. And that's not how it works. If somebody at this university, any of the universities that I've ever heard of, wanted to spray these chemicals, I can guarantee you that they'd have to pass a lot of ethics considerations. There is a lot of red tape they need to get through. And the idea of spraying basic things...
And that's why people claim it's an emergency, including Dan Wigington, because they're doing it against the ethics of everybody that would say no.
So that's what I said. There is a big difference between things like cloud seeding and spraying just harmless, like iodide salts. That's the main one I've heard of. Other than the fact that they did try it once on a hurricane, it's either hurricane or cyclone, I can't remember exactly where it was, and the hurricane changed direction and made landfall and did a lot of damage, so we haven't really done it since then. So yes, I'll acknowledge that there are people out there researching, trying to change, modify weather to our benefit, make it rain when there are droughts, things like that. But the claim that they're using heavy metals, on the other hand, is not something any university, because I have heard of these claims before, has ever made. The idea that the military would try and poison the atmosphere. If you're going to poison the population, I can think of a lot better ways to do it than spraying chemicals randomly into the upper atmosphere.
And if it's true, then it's an emergency. If it's not true, then okay, wrong.
If it's true, it's an emergency, but it's not true, though.
Well,
so why are we even talking about it?
That I'm researching it. That's why.
Can I ask then if you're researching?
No. Wait, Journey. Watching YouTube videos is not enough research to know the truth about this. I mean, I'm looking at this guy's channel.
Actual test. I don't have the money, so the best I can.
No. Okay. So when we say research, when we say look into it, have you read any scientific publications from universities that are working on, say, weather modification?
I've got 10 tabs open on my internet right now with just multiple different sources looking at these things, which
So, okay, so can you give me an example of some of these sources then? Give me a few examples.
the one I'm looking at right now is StopSprayingCalifornia.com.
Okay.
well-
Next, this is where I'm having an issue. So how many scientific publications have you got open? How many articles from these universities directly? And when I say scientific publications, I mean the proper journal articles like Science, Nature, etc., where these results would be published. Because if the university's doing them, they will publish the results if they get anything worthwhile publishing.
And again, I'm a researcher. I'm not an expert, but quite a few different Great question. I'm looking for it right now.
Just while you're looking, I just want to make a general comment, is that scientific papers are not written for the general public. I can understand why it's hard for someone, even myself, to go to a new topic and read them. It can take sometimes years to get familiar with a topic, but at the same time, journalism is written to be more, I guess, catchy, and it's written very, very quickly. And that's one of the problems. You've got deadlines to meet. So whenever you do research, and this is something I seriously suggest, Google Scholar is your friend. If you can use local library databases, do it. If you can utilize local university databases, do it. Sometimes you can even just email the people who wrote the paper and ask them for a copy. But if you're going to do research, do not underestimate the use of scientific papers, because it has to go through a lot of rigorous research. If nothing else I say today is remembered, you can be wrong, and go to the original scientific papers.
I have to get this in there, because censorship is not a good thing to include in peer review science. Skepticism, fine. Censorship, when you're certain that it's not okay, fine. You make that decision for yourself. Everybody should say no when it's important to say no. On the other hand, if you don't know, don't lean on your own misunderstanding. You're absolutely right. Going to credible papers, evidence, sources, I absolutely agree.
Yes.
So,
and geoengineering.com or geoengineeringwatch.com is not a credible source. If the person that runs your website has been on InfoWars, I can tell you right off the bat, it's probably not a credible source.
This is the problem. You're so against it that you're blaming the messenger. And when people get into that mentality, that's when skepticism and pessimism and pragmatism are a problem. I'm not saying they're bad. They're very important, but in moderation.
The messenger is required to have credentials to make the claims that they are making, right? Like, the messenger is a part of the process. The reason why I would trust someone like Matthew
doing a bunch of bullshit. Trump was president.
No,
look, I'm done with this conversation, because here's the thing. The messenger is part of the process. Us criticizing the messenger is something that we have to do. I get it. Like, it makes it look like we're picking on the little guy, because we're not always talking about people who work at universities or do whatever. And I understand that mentality. But the problem is, when you're making his claims as big as this one, when you're talking about entire weather modification systems that are happening covertly between organizations, then your credibility really does matter. If you're just some Joe Schmo down the street who made a website from a WordPress blog, you're not going to be credible. I don't care what you have to say. It doesn't mean anything to me. If I start talking about weather modification, just because I have a microphone and a show, that doesn't mean I can just say whatever I want just because I'm a skeptic. We have to consider that too. So I disagree with this. Oh, you're just shooting down the messenger. That's part of the process. We have to take account of the messenger too. Anyway.
Yeah, and I want to echo that as well. That this is my 8th year now at university, and I still would not, compared to the professors and the other people that I work with call myself an expert. Not compared to them. There are people who have spent decades in this, learning an area of science like spectroscopy, like just how do you detect these chemicals, is a long, long process. As I said, science is boring, and I know it sounds like we're just being closed-minded, or I don't want to hear that, but that's not the case. And this is why I kept asking, how are we doing these tests? Because I want to know, if you could come to me and say, look, they were doing this spectroscopy, here are the samples, this is what they put in, these are the results. And obviously I don't expect that on a live show, but if I go around and find that, then I'll be like, okay, maybe there's something more to this. Let's look into it. But when it comes out that there's someone who does not have the qualifications, who does not have any evidence they've got the necessary expertise to know what they're talking about, then we're going to be, okay, how do we know this person is correct? And if they don't demonstrate it, then we're going to hold our belief and say, well, it looks like they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, like, it's the internet age, man. Anybody can make some stuff up. There's entire cottage industries of people making things up. People have to realize this. This is somebody's source of income, whether they genuinely believe in the BS that they're talking about or not. And yeah, is it a category error to completely dismiss someone's credibility because they've been on InfoWars? Yeah, on some level, that's an argument from authority in reverse, right? But at the same time, we're not talking about, like, this is a claim that could be made by other kinds of people, people that can do serious research on this stuff. And look, if I found out something crazy like that, I'm not going to go to places like InfoWars that are known BS peddlers. All right. If you're swimming in, shit, like, don't keep swimming in it. You want to go to places where somebody is going to be more receptive to that, because otherwise it's just going to get lost in the noise of where it's seen everywhere else. I mean, it's put on these places like InfoWars, these ideas, because you're more likely to believe in the other stuff that they have to say too. You're part of a customer base at that point. It is an entire industry that people get caught up in this stuff. And this is just one of them. Weather modification stuff is not new. It's been around for a while. And people have been talking about what this stuff is doing to the environment. And guess what? We don't have any good evidence that this stuff is really happening, at least what they specifically claim is happening, right? There's different stuff with HARPA and all that, we can go on. But we're running close to the end of the show. There's one more call here I need to take before we wrap things up. Looks like this is a Matt D. Matt D calling in from Austin, Texas. Maybe you've called in the show before.
It is.
Oh, shit. It's Matt Dillahunty. What's up, Matt?
What's up? I just want to say, good show, great guest. And, on the one hand, I start to worry sometimes that the internet might be both the greatest and worst thing that we've ever come up with, because it puts everybody on the same footing. And you remember the commercials? Well, you probably won't remember, but the commercials that I saw when I was a kid, they would put somebody in a lab coat when they were trying to sell you something, so to give the impression of a doctor. And the internet gives everybody a lab coat, a stethoscope, a degree they can put on the wall behind them, even if they never earned it or anything else. I mean, there's experts everywhere. And while there's great access to information, and we're probably getting better, I don't know that we aren't necessarily shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. But that's not why I called. Hey, I'm doing the Atheist Experience this weekend with Jim, but I figured, Dan, you want to come on the 21st and do Atheist Experience with me?
On the 21st? Let me check my calendar. Yeah, I'm doing it. Let's go ahead. 21st. Wait, you don't mean the 14th, right? You don't mean the 14th? You mean the 21st? No. You sure about this?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. That's what I was told by the people who are actually in charge of the show, because I don't get to make those decisions.
All right. I'm coming on Atheist Experience then. All right. I actually had it written down wrong, but yes, we're doing it. Oh, that's funny.
You can still come over and social distance meet the new puppy whenever you want. And Matthew,
that's right.
I get to talk to you, but I'm really thrilled to see you on here.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. Yeah, Matt, you got the new puppy already, or you're still getting it?
Oh, no, he's here trying to climb up on me right now.
Ah, yes. New puppy. Great. Awesome. Well, Matt's got a new puppy. I'm going to be on Atheist Experience, so look forward to that. And thanks for the invite, Matt. That's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, great show, you guys.
All right. Thanks, Matt. I'll talk to you later.
I just have a really quick theory hypothesis I want to postulate, that when you've got multiple mats together, you don't add the mat power together. It gets squared, so that if you've got two mats, you've like boosted by a factor of, you've multiplied the strength of the mats together that way.
Exponential mats. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Still haven't got a way of testing it, but I'm going to hold to my theory.
We'll have to get some more
my
mats.
Hypothesis.
Just though, like fit 5 different mats on the line at the same time. I wonder if we could do that. Probably not a good idea.
Unbeatable.
Yeah, unbeatable. But what is beatable is that this is the end of the show. That didn't make sense, but we're running out of time here on Truth Wanted, folks. I am going to be on an Atheist Experience, so you should check that out. We're also, both me and Matthew are going to go on the Discord after show, so come check us out there so we can talk more about Scientology and geoengineering and physics and all kinds of cool stuff. But before we go and do that, Matthew, where can people find you at?
You can find me. I have a YouTube channel, Almost a Doctor. So if you just type that in, you'll be able to find it. I also have Twitter and Instagram, mainly the Twitter if you want to get in contact with me. Still a fairly small channel, so if you actually contact me, there's a good chance I'll get back. And I'm always open to new ideas. So if you want to learn about whether submarines can fly, or my next video will probably be on the best lightsaber color to use from a science point of view, then I might have those answers for you.
Yes. And if you want to find me, there's a couple different ways you can do that as well. I'm on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan, but also, hey, the Truth Wanted has a new Twitter account that you should go follow so you can get all of your Truth Wanted news. And I'm pulling it up now because it's a crazy link, and we don't have it yet in the bottom third, but it is at Truth Wanted Live. Oh, we got to change there. Yeah, at Truth Wanted Live if you want to follow the Truth Wanted account on Twitter instead of just my personal one. But you can follow me on Twitter too. You can go to the after show with us on Discord, but there's a couple other ways you can get in touch with us. And one of them is through the email address. It's truth@atheist-community.org. And then let's talk about how you can support the show. I already mentioned, of course, you can support the show through Patreon, patreon.com/truthwanted. There's a couple other ways. We also have a merch store. That's a bit.ly link for that in the description, bit.ly/AEN merch. That's bit.ly. We got shirts, we got hoodies, we got stickers, we got masks. It's pretty cool. Another way to support the show is through YouTube memberships. If you like typing in that chat, you get cool little emojis and stuff. And it's pretty neat. There's one with my face on it. I kind of like it because it's my face. So those are all great ways you can support the show. Another way, if you want to get in touch and hang out with people, there's the Truth Wanted Facebook group, the fan group, baby. So get on that fan group and come talk to the fans of Truth Wanted, the best fans, the coolest fans of the ACA's many, many shows, if you want my opinion. But I'm biased, of course. And last but never, ever least, I have to give a wonderful, fantastic, stupendous, humongous thank you to the wonderful crew for making this show possible every single week. There's our crew cam. What's Puck doing this week? He's drinking that purple. No, it's not purple. That's orange. He's got that orange soda. We're getting sprayed and cleaned. Oh, we got all kinds of stuff going on. Little kitties. Man, it's just a crazy watching that crew cam. If you're listening to the audio version of this show, you're missing out on that crew cam. There's a lot of stuff going on there. But anyway, thank you guys so much for making this show happen. Matthew, you have any final words before we close out tonight's show?
Just, you can always be wrong, but like I always say in my videos, be like a proton and stay positive. My apologies. I know that's corny, but
that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Matthew, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Remember, folks, to always keep wanting the truth, and I'll see you next time.